Hello, my name is Jonathan Parker. I am an adjunct professor at Illinois Central College. I am recording this for my comparative politics class in fall 2024. I'm using an open educational resource whose name you can see on the screen, Introduction to Comparative Government and Politics, and we're working explicitly from Chapter 3, States and Regimes, written by Julia Wendt, PhD. I make no claim to ownership of this work, nothing. I'm using it for purely educational purposes. And with that being said, let's dive in. So, states, what are they? Why do we need them? Are they any good? What is government? Is government necessary? These are questions we, of course, ask ourselves in the field of comparative politics. The definition of government, why it's necessary. Some people don't think it is, other people do. We have a global population right now of about 8 billion people, and most of these people live under some form of government. We have almost 200 identified countries worldwide, with 193 of those in the United Nations. What countries, Mr. Parker, you ask, are not in the United Nations? Vatican City and Palestine. Yes, North Korea is in the United Nations. It was admitted in 91. Don't hold me to that, but 91, I'm pretty sure. We found ourselves, in the situation of being ruled over or governed by some thing, right? In the case of America, it's the president, the Congress, the Supreme Court. At the federal level, our governor; at the state level, the state legislatures. So, we're going to consider aspects of political power within countries, learn the terminology comparativists use to understand the world, and I'm just going to circle this because whenever you see a term that I have differentiated in some way, you can bet that's probably going to be on the exam. And discover important problems and issues related to states and regimes. So, why does government exist? Is government necessary? This is surprisingly a debatable question. Without government, without a societal structure, we have anarchy, which is a lack of societal structure and order, where there is no established hierarchy of power. So like this is what I'm talking about. If you see that here, anarchy, yes, that would be a term that would be on your test. A society without government or central leadership. There are no countries on earth that are purely anarchic. Somalia was the most recent kind of anarchist country. It was certainly a failed state, but in a failed state still there is some sort of order. And take a look at this. I get really worried about clicking on links with YouTube because I've gotten copyright strikes and all that. So just click on links when I have them in there. They're there for a reason, and that was why I did the whole big spiel at the beginning about not owning this. Anarchy has not been a norm within the communities of humans over the past 15,000 years. We decided that it was best, if we were going to survive as a species, if we came together and worked together. Our cooperation, whether that be as hunter-gatherers, laborers on a farm, whatever, aided the survival of the species. And in cases where people came together, we eventually see these rules, maybe informal, maybe written down, and norms of how to act in society. In some cases, we had informal leaders. There'd be like an unelected town sort of mayor, if you want to think of it that way. Informal rules and norms. I mean, some more formalized ones. In the 1200s, for instance, Magna Carta, in biblical times, the Ten Commandments, between the two, the Code of Hammurabi. Early humans existed often in small groups that were composed mostly of family members. And we saw a social order begin to develop there too. I mean, even today, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, brother, sister, what's your family dynamic like? Do you know if you're the favorite child? Do you know if you're the black sheep of the family? We see a hierarchy develop. Is your family matriarchal? Is it led, in other words, by an older female? Is it patriarchal? Does the man lead, whether that be grandpa, dad, whoever? It's what we're talking about at the micro level that's happening here. And families eventually come together into tribes. Tribes form their own rules and norms for how its members should act. Those rules varied from tribe to tribe. The goal, however, was still survival. And in time, circumstances change. We move from hunter-gatherers, we settle down into farmers. The agricultural revolution happens. That leads to a population growth. Why? Because we stopped going where the food was. We started growing our own. We grew our own. There was a stable food source. There were more of us in one place, more babies. So the main takeaway here, we chose not to live in anarchy and thought that our status quo would be improved with a stronger set of rules. We believe that individual and societal goals could be accomplished through cooperation in a rules-based society, and that statement alone, out of that would come what Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Rousseau called the social contract. Here's another term for you that is certainly going to be on the test. Social contract, a formal or informal agreement between the rulers and those ruled in a society. In our case, you might argue it's the U.S. Constitution or our state constitution, an agreement between two parties, the rulers. I hate using that term, especially in the context of American government, the president, the Congress, and the ruled over, meaning me and probably whoever's watching this video. So we submit to the laws of the rulers in exchange for certain benefits. We pay our taxes as Americans. Those taxes go to fund aircraft carriers and tanks and bullets for guns, and as such we have the protection of what arguably is the best military on earth. Social contracts can be voluntary or involuntary and can be observed in almost every type of political system, democratic or otherwise. So, I pay my taxes. I'm a citizen of the place I'm living in right now. I pay my taxes to the town. Okay, the town will make sure that the electric grid is functioning, something like that. Involuntary, is also a thing that happens. We won't get into it too much. A voluntary social contract, people agree to submit to the ruling class. Doesn't mean that those who are ruled are entitled to anything special. It's just what happens. We're born into a social order. If there is an involuntary social contract, there's a ruling class you have that demands obedience. And those being ruled are forced into the social contract, whether they like it or not. Disagreements can lead to banishment or death. You'll see this, say, in dictatorships. Maybe in Cuba, maybe in Cuba under the Castros anyway. Maybe North Korea under Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il and going backwards. There's an implicit social contract also. You're born into this, which is most of the people that are going to be watching this video. You're born as a U.S. citizen, okay. The American government recognizes you as one of their own. We have birthright citizenship, meaning if you're born on the land, you're one of us. You might never need to act upon your citizenship. You might never need, you'd be very lucky if this was the case. You might never get called for jury duty. You might never get arrested if you don't pay your taxes. You might never do X, Y, or Z. All acts of citizenship I'm describing may never happen. But you benefit anyway. So even if you don't pay your taxes, the cops still show up if someone's trying to rob your house. Naturalization, the process by which non-citizens formally become citizens of the country they reside in. This is a beautiful process, and if you haven't, I'd encourage you to just YouTube naturalization ceremony or something like that. It's really beautiful to watch people who've worked so hard to study to become a citizen of really whatever country. It's a really long process, a long, arduous process. You're getting background checks, oral examinations, paperwork. You have to pledge allegiance to your host country. Like I said, a lot goes into it. You have to really, really want it. Naturalization is a good example of a voluntary and formal social contract, where you get someone pledging obedience and allegiance in exchange for the benefits of being a citizen. This gentleman here, I don't know where he's from, or even if this is a naturalization ceremony, to be quite honest. It just looked like a good picture to fit the slide. I know, shame on me. But I don't know where he came from, but you can bet that to get to this point took years off his life. He wanted, if this is indeed what was happening, to be an American. And he's going to get the benefits thereof because he came from wherever he came from and pledged allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. So we have social contract theory philosophers such as Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but they're just three of the more prominent ones. Hobbes says that all people act within their own selfish interest to make calculations to ensure their survival. This guy is the author of the Leviathan, the famous part of which life is nasty, brutish, and short, and get over it. People are inherently selfish, that the state of nature was unstable. As I said, life is nasty, brutish, and short. So pessimistic, maybe, if depending on how you think, maybe a realistic view of the world. Then we have John Locke, arguably one of the preeminent Enlightenment thinkers of his time. He wrote a masterpiece, 2 treatises of government, and contributed greatly to the social contract theory. He was the one who set out the principles of natural rights, which means that we're born with rights. And this is, how do I want to phrase it? A debatable subject because it's been tied in with God, that we're made in God's image. Since he was perfectly free, so too are we. We're born with the right to speak freely, to express ourselves freely, to write as we wish, to think as we wish. They're unalienable, meaning they can't be taken from us. The framers of the United States Constitution wrote that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. When I teach American government, I always ask what the most important word of that amendment is. Students always say every other word other than the word the. The, as silly as it might sound, gives recognition to the fact that Congress, the president, the Supreme Court, whatever comes down the line, can't take that from us because no government had the power to give us the ability to speak freely. Anyway, that's my take on it. So natural rights, property, you marry who you want, you speak how you wish. Now that doesn't mean, though, that you're free of the consequences of those actions. You just have those rights. Governments are expected to protect natural rights, those natural rights, through their political institutions and structures. So Locke was more, I don't want to use the word rose-colored glasses, but he saw the world in a different way, certainly from Hobbes. He thought positively about humankind. I don't know if I'd necessarily use that word, but that's the word that the chapter uses. Locke believed in the power of the state, and he thought that the state did a better job of protecting its citizens than the citizens could themselves. So Hobbes favored a more authoritarian type government, kind of think of it like a nanny state. He thought that the state needed to control the masses for their own good, the good of the masses, that is. Locke believed humans were perfectly capable of living peacefully with each other, and that we didn't need a big authoritarian Big Brother type state. Locke, in his work, heavily influenced the founding of the United States, especially through the thinking of Alexander Hamilton, Madison, Thomas Jefferson. We hold these truths to be self-evident. I was quoting Jefferson. So Rousseau says that authority of any kind in a society is only legitimate if it comes from the consent of all people. There has to be a unified will which takes into consideration the interests of the people for the common good. So does the social contract apply, say, in the America of today? Does anybody you know, maybe that hasn't gone through a naturalization ceremony, has anybody consented to the government? Something to think about. Early version here, an early version of the social contract can also be observed in ancient Greece. Ancient Greece is also credited with the first democratic state. Men are born free, yet everywhere are in chains, says Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the opening lines of his 1762 work, The Social Contract. Rousseau, in this work, argues that society does not lend itself to equality and equitable treatment of those within society, and instead, society imprisons people within various chains and suppresses their natural born rights and liberties. So, Locke, Hobbes, and Rousseau would definitely be fair game for the exam. We have democracy. That comes from the Greek word demo and kratos. It's a political system wherein government is dictated by the power of the people. We have a direct democracy, and again, this is a term that would be very fair to put on the exam, where every single citizen is able to be involved in the legal process and able to have some amount of power over the laws of society. Direct democracies work best in very small states, maybe villages, hamlets, wherever, where people would have the time to do this. In a country, well, really any country, anywhere today, I mean, you're talking millions of people, maybe not the island nations, billions in the case of India, China, 1.3 billions. it is not something that is functional.